good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your film?
Yes, so I'm the director of Paper Accordion. It follows the day in the life of two long-distance friends in fragmented moments throughout the day. I'm also an animator and filmmaker based in Toronto.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to talk to you about your film. The film that I directed, Love is the First Sacred Lesson, which is about queerness and being Mi'kmaq. Also has a lot to do with like relationships and friendships over long distances. So I think that there's like a lot that we can talk about. I am super excited to hear more about your process. Just to start off, like what was the production like? You know, were you shooting in multiple locations? Like how did you come up with this idea? Like where did it come from?
Yeah, so I think I use a lot of dualism in the film. I hate to use that word, but it's the truth, I guess. And we shot in Montreal and Toronto, and it kind of always centered around those two cities and the two people, me and Tian. And I think what I found interesting with both our films is that we both centered around friendship. In your case, it was more of multiple people and kind of figuring out who you are through other people, which I really liked, whereas mine is really centered around two figures. But yeah, it was really nice to see your film on Instagram because it was, all about love and friendship and on a platform that normally doesn't have that sort of content. So
it's really true. And so for context, I guess, like both of our films are going to be appearing at FNC. Both of our films are going to be at the festival this year in the forum section because they were made to be on Instagram, as you mentioned. And yeah, that was like a pretty different way of making a film, pretty different content to sort of put on that platform. I haven't seen a lot of other Instagram movies before. It wasn't like I could go back into the archive and be like, oh yes, this Oscar-winning Instagram like film. So, it was kind of an interesting learning curve, in terms of that. And, when you were making Paper Accordion, and the way that you had it released on Instagram was sort of like done in such a way that was very much like somebody updating their stories, going back and forth throughout the day between these two friendships. Like, why was timing an important part of that for you? And like, why was that particular aspect of telling a story on Instagram important? That like, it wasn't just released all in one go, that there was sort of like this moments throughout the day that your film was happening?
Well, I think the kind of main theme of the project was this idea of one-sided communication, and it really revolved around letters with the use of like ASMR paper sounds and like the paper foley, and like letters, and on social media it's sort of like speaking with no active listener. So it's like a constant one-sided correspondence, and I think having it play throughout the day kind of captured that feeling, hopefully. And it's sort of also mimics kind of like your compulsive checking on the phone. I kind of want, I thought of what will make this film different because it's on Instagram, compared to having a theatrical release or having it play in a different format. So that's kind of my thinking process for it. How about, what did you think about making something for Instagram?
Well, I mean, it definitely was challenging. Like I don't want to sugarcoat that aspect of it because you have to start to think about the way that your film fits together in a really different way. And like kind of as you're talking about, like, you have to start thinking about like how social media functions as opposed to like how something that's like in a theater, in a film festival or something is going to function and tell a story. So, there were certain things that if I'm kind of like challenging with that, I was sort of like, well, I kind of knew what the story it was that I wanted to tell, but it was like figuring out actually how to use the medium in a way that made sense. But also being somebody who comes from an animation background, and knowing that I wanted to integrate animated elements into the film, the fact that like each section of the film was maximum 15 seconds was also really nice in a way. Like it was like even though it was like a structural challenge, I felt like it also helped ground me in that process, because I could think in my head like, okay, max, I have 15 seconds of animation to do, you know, and as opposed to sort of thinking it as like, oh, I'm making a 7-minute film in, you know, 6 months, and parts of it are animated. Like I could think about it as like 15-second chunks. I'm like, okay, this 15 seconds is animated. Okay, I can focus on that. We both appear in our films, and in my film, I'm entirely animated, or appearing like in images. I like still photograph images. Like I never appear in the flesh. That's
Emotion.
such a yeah. I never you know, for me that like a big part of that was sort of needing a little bit of distance between. Oh, I do appear in the flesh at one point. There is a part in the beginning of the film where I am there.
But the filters.
Yeah, but it's also in a mirror, right? Like I needed a little bit of distance because this was a really personal story, you know, and I needed to have that. But like when we're thinking about social media, and when we're thinking about, like you're saying, like the compulsive sort of like checking of a phone and like the one-way communication, so much of like the image we present is often like a projected like best version of ourselves, right? So how did you feel about that process of like including yourself in your film? Like was that always your intent, or you know, was it something that kind of happened because of the circumstances you were making it under? And like how much of that felt like a social media performance, and how much of that felt like being more of a documentarian?
I was very nervous about being in front of the camera. I never planned on ever being in front of the camera, but to be honest, I needed to sell it as a documentary to, you know, insert myself in it more, I guess. And I think my film is not as revealing as yours. It's not as personal. Like, even if me and Tian, who appears in the film and is the co-writer, is, you know, the main figures, it's not about us, like about who we are. And yeah, I was very nervous. Like I think after the first edit, we watched it and there was like not a lot of me in it, so we actually had to reshoot, and just like it was just me, and, and so that was kind of an embarrassing process. But you know, I just try not to watch it so often. No. I find I really like the mirror shots. For in yours, it's, you know, kind of like a portrait, and then you go on to have more portraits of others, you know, and you use them to speak about yourself. So I really like that, and the rotoscoping.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the rotoscoping is super fun. Like it's a form of animation, and I'm sure you appreciate this as like also an animator. Like it's a form of animation that I feel like we used to see a lot more of. We don't see a lot of rotoscoping these days. It used to be very like in vogue with what was like, you know, I can think of like the weird 70s Lord of the Rings film was like rotoscoped, and it's like crazy.
There's rotoscope in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. In I think it's like Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings film. It's wild. It is a trip.
You have to share this with me.
Yeah, I absolutely do. But like, I feel like that we don't see a lot of rotoscoping anymore. So it's like a really fun format to play with. It's so fluid, the way that like the images come together. And like, I was like, okay, I want something that's a little bit dreamlike, a little bit like some moments are really intentionally like naturalistic, and some moments are weirder. So that's why I kind of went with the rotoscoping. But yeah, no, the portraits was always like, because I come to filmmaking through photography. So I think that the portrait side of like capturing somebody is still like something I think about a lot in terms of my process. And and kind of like the way that I actually shot the portraits, oftentimes people didn't know that I was filming. Like I was being sneaky about it. I was, you know, because the whole process of sort of making the film, you know, I didn't go about it like a traditional documentary process, right? Like, it was very, what I pitched to the NFB wasn't so much a documentary film, but a road trip. And I sort of said to them, look, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. Trying to honor as much as possible our Mi'kmaq worldview and our way of doing things. And that meant making sure that I wasn't telling a story that was like somebody else's and that I was like taking something away, but that I was like giving something back. And so Love is the First Sacred Lesson was essentially me for 2.5 weeks driving from Montreal all throughout New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and Cape Breton. We did like 4,000 kilometers in 2.5 weeks. And we went to go visit all these other queer Mi'kmaq folks all over like New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And like I said, when I was doing the portraits, it would be like, I didn't pitch like, I'd love to do an interview with you. It was more like, hey, do you need help getting groceries? Let's get some groceries and make supper. Or like, oh, hey, can you meet up with us and like, we'll go for a walk. Like, oh, your kids need to be picked up? We'll go pick up your kids, like we have a van. So, yeah, like it was really, and then through those moments we would end up talking, and I would ask people about their lives and the things that they had experienced as like queer Mi'kmaq and like what made them, Two-Spirit or Indigiqueer. Like how did they feel about those terms? How did they feel about their identity? Because, the Mi'kmaq converted to Christianity or were converted to Christianity in the early 1600s. Like a lot of what our traditions would have been, were kind of lost or went very, very far underground. So, in a certain way, we're making like contemporary history is the way that I kind of refer to it. The film hopefully will contribute to that, but like, just in living our lives as like Indigiqueer or Two-Spirit people, we're sort of creating our own traditions, So I wanted to reflect that in the film. But I like what you said sort of about like learning about yourself through other people, because I feel like so much of our Mi'kmaq way of doing things is about like learning like with others. Like, there's only so much you can kind of learn at home alone. There's only so much knowledge that you can get from, grandfather Google, So like there's a lot of learning that just has to come through like meeting people and talking and spending time. Absolutely. Yeah, so I wanted to ask a little bit about how you felt about making something like for a specific social media platform, in the sense of like, I feel like in this past like couple of years, especially, we've talked more and more about like social media companies as corporate entities, and like Facebook's been before Congress in the United States for contributing to war crimes. Like how did you feel about like using a platform like Instagram, and is it something that you think you'll continue to do in your work?
No, I don't think I will, but I really like the experience to experiment with the format. I don't think it's progressive at all to make a film on Instagram, given the circumstances of Facebook. Mm-hmm. But I think the most difficult challenge I had with this film is that throughout the trajectory of making it, my views on technology had changed pretty dramatically. Mm-hmm. I was very exhausted at this like continual desire for progress and the new, and mm-hmm. The need to like emphasize technology and art together. I was kind of just like sick of it, and I think that kind of feeling of resignation or exhaustion kind of it shows in the film a bit.
Because we had started these films, like for context, we had started these films but pre-pandemic, and then all of a sudden we were like finishing them in the pandemic, which I feel like in a very short period of time pretty radically shifted how a lot of us felt about technology, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like I actually had shot everything before the pandemic, and I also edited most of it before, but it did seem very different. Mm-hmm. The timing of the release, it was it was kind of difficult to like shift my attitudes towards, you know, as most people when they change their minds on things. Because I wasn't saying like I was like super optimistic of like technology and everything, but I think being an animator, like the medium is so dependent on like technology and stuff. So I was always trying to like focus on the medium and technology and all these things, and I realized like that's kind of pointless, you know. And it was funny because when you're talking about the 15-second editing, I've had a few people like, you know, kind of tell me like, oh, it must be hard to edit this because of the limitations, but I find that it made it easier, you know, like you know, we have that both in common, being animators. Like I storyboarded the hell out of it, or I storyboarded very diligently, so it was actually very easy to just like plop in the segments. And I like limitations in some ways. I think it helps.
Oh, for sure. I think that like sometimes, especially with a project like this where there isn't like a huge precedent for like what the work can look like, having that limitation of like, when you upload something to Instagram stories, it can max be 15 seconds is actually like really good as a structuring thing. I know that like, it's you know, like I said, you know, it's a challenge at the same time. But like, yeah, I thought that having that sort of like structuring, like already like laid down for us at the very beginning was really helpful in terms of like thinking about the film as like, okay, small little tiny bits and pieces. I also felt like my feelings about technology kind of have shifted since making the film, and well, like making the film as well. Like, and I'd love to talk more about that. But yeah, very similarly, like I really. Like I had made art using like Instagram in particular previous to like making this film, and you know, I think that, you know, going into it, I was pretty optimistic. I was like, okay, cool, we're gonna get to do this cool new thing using this platform. But I think like where my cynicism comes in now is the fact that like, if Instagram disappears tomorrow, what happens to the film that I made specifically for this platform, right? Because that's the tough part. Like, it's not going to easily translate into another medium, you know, in the same way. So it's like, then are we stuck? You know, if Instagram goes away, can I not screen this at like a festival in another format? So yeah, having that kind of reliance and that relationship with like a corporate entity was definitely disconcerting for me. Like, also, just like the pandemic being so intense, especially on like social media, was also like a big thing of just being like, you know what, I just want to like throw my phone into the St. Lawrence Seaway and I want to be done with it. You know, like,
yeah, because like, you know, we talked before about how you know, social media can offer a lot of things, like for education, like access to a lot of different things, like resources and community, and a sense of community. But you had some like really great things to say the last time we talked about like queer censorship as well. And yeah, I mean, I like to hear more of your opinions on that. But I did have a quick question before.
Yeah, sure.
If you, let's say it wasn't a part of a series that were meant to play on Instagram, how would you want your film to be screened ideally?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, because I think that there's things that, if it wasn't for Instagram, there's definitely things that I would like maybe change about the film, but maybe not. That's a good question. I think like, because I work, you know, as a curator, as a film programmer, I love the like film festival presentation side of things, because especially on the shorts level, it's such a good moment to discover new things. Like, you know, people aren't always going to like search out short films online, you know, just to like on their free time, but people might go to like a short screening at a festival and discover something that's like completely, you know, changes their mind, blows their world open, whatever, you know? So like, I think that for me, like a film festival or like in classrooms, like I'd love this film to be something that gets shown, especially in Indigenous classrooms on reserve or like in communities where it's predominantly Indigenous, like I would love the work to be used that way. What about you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I think it would be interesting to see it in a gallery space with like multiple screens. Yeah, well, that's for another time, I guess.
Yeah.
But I do like, that's what I really like about the way you approach your work, is that your experience and your work as a programmer and curator, I think you can kind of see that in the way that you approach films as well. It's very community based, and you know, kind of always trying to bring other people along, and I really like that.
I think that part of that has to do with the fact that I think part of that has to do with the fact that like that is very much within like the values that I was like really raised around. Like you know, a lot of like I've spent a lot of time living in situations that were both like intentional communities as well as like you know, situations where like community was more emphasized. So I think that's like part of who I am and my personality, but like I think that like that's also 100% like why I gravitate towards something like programming. That's why I make the films that I do the way that I do. Like, I just don't want to do anything alone, you know? There's a lot of joy that comes out of making things with other people, even if it's not like, even if it means that you have to give up some control, even if it means that you like have a lot of unknowns. Like I'm working on a film right now that's, again, like a big collaboration with a bunch of queer Indigenous and Afro-Indigenous folks. And I have no idea what this film is going to look like. But I'm 110% into it, because even just the conversations that we're having, you know, as collaborators are so life-giving that like I wouldn't want to do it any other way, you know? And you work a lot with Tian, who's your collaborator in Paper Accordion, right? Like you guys have presented art pieces together and are good friends. Like, are you guys going to continue to collaborate on things, or will it just sort of be project dependent?
I mean, probably. I feel like I keep bugging her about things. And, you know, I think that's something that I've also been changing. It wasn't intentional, but I've always been trained that way, and I'm sure you have as well, to kind of be the individual auteur or like artist on a project or work. And I think I learn a lot from people who rely on others to produce work, and I think that's really nice what you were saying about your community. It's also interesting that I think both our films are about displacement in a way, but in a very, we say very different things about it, you know, like kind of your return to Mi'kma'ki, and then like these kind of back and forth from Montreal and Toronto. For me, it's I don't know if you had anything to say about that.
Yeah, no, I was really going to bring up the question of displacement, and like in French you say dépaysé, which I always like as a term, because it's like you're really, like you're taken away from your country, like it's been taken away. It's like, you know, and you know, I think that feeling is, at least, you know, speaking from like the perspective of like an Indigenous person living outside of my home territory, I feel that all the time. I carry that with me all the time. I think about that constantly. Like, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that like I think about home at least like 10 times a day. And like home, not just in the sense of like a physical like place, oh, this is where I grew up, but home also in the sense of like, you know, referring to like Mi'kma'ki, like referring to the fact that like, even though there are places in the Maritimes and Atlantic provinces that still have Mi'kmaq names technically, you know, so much of our relationship with the land has been erased, you know, and continues to be erased. And like our, you know, we continue to have to struggle for treaty rights. We continue to have to struggle against things like environmental racism. That's a huge, huge problem in Mi'kmaq communities in Nova Scotia right now. And like I'll put it to you like this, in terms of like displacement, like the names that we use to call places, like our place names. Like I grew up in Halifax, which is Echebuktuk in Mi'kmaq, and you know that means like wide deep harbor, which is like talking about our harbor in Halifax. So that name has significance to that specific place, and now we call it Halifax. So it's almost like, again, I think as a trans person too, this touches me a lot, of sort of like this idea that a place has a name, but you're going to call it a different name, the same way that like when you're trans and you like choose what your name is, you know, and people call you by your dead name, because they're like, no, you are Stephen or whatever. Yeah. You know, so I think about like that in terms of like an encapsulation of like how colonization relates to the land. It chose the name that it's going to call the land, and it's going to call it that regardless. Mm-hmm.
It's when you mentioned that there's a history of Christianity and conversion in the Mi'kmaq community. Like my name is Grace. Mm-hmm. It's a very Christian name, and you know, and my family has a pretty long history with Christian missionaries as well. So I feel like that's kind of embedded in my name, because it's you know, I mean, it could also just sound nice as a word, but to me, it sounds very Christian, right? So,
it absolutely is. Yeah. No, it's really interesting, and I know that we're going to have to wrap up our conversation soon, but I wanted you to talk a little bit about how displacement plays in your film, because I feel like it's displacement, but there's also so much longing in your film. Like, there's so much like longing to connect, and like, you know, certain segments, I feel like it's like, you know, you're just like missing each other. You know, it's like you're not quite able to connect in the way that you seem to want to, and that longing sort of like just feels like it goes deeper, you know? So can you talk a little bit about that, and like about like why that was the theme that you wanted to explore with Tian, and like, you know, what that sort of Toronto, Montreal kind of like signifies for you?
Yeah, you put it very nicely. I think I did try to do that with the subtitles, especially because they don't match and they kind of appear randomly in different languages. Yeah, I wanted to document how, you know, I had to move between two cities and stuff. It wasn't like, you know, it's supposed to be like a dramatic thing or anything, but just like this idea of not belonging to a certain place, and but I don't want it to, like, I really try hard not to have my work rely on like identity, and because I don't think I make political films. I also feel like I don't make experimental films. Like I feel weird calling people recording in film too. Like it's, you know, so like the whole thing is kind of confusing, but I liked how it disregarded the audience, you know, by being confusing with the subtitles and kind of appearing randomly. That was really enjoyable.
And like disregarding the audience, just as like our final sort of thing, like you bring up disregarding the audience. Can you speak a little bit more to like what you mean about that? Because I think I know what you mean based on like, you know, our friendship and like previous conversations we've had, but like I think for folks like watching that's like an interesting idea, because often in film we're like, you know, think about who your audience is. Who is your audience? You know, like we're always thinking about the people who are going to see this as a final result, you know? So like, what is it to disregard your audience?
Yeah, I mean, when I get asked that, and I'm sure you've been asked that too, like who is your target audience, or who's the audience for this? I don't like that question. You know, like it doesn't have to be meant for everyone. And I think that's a very noble thing to do, especially for you know, like with like Indigenous kind of groups and communities online. It's okay to withhold information to outsiders, you know, and I think both our films do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and you're 100% right. Like, you know, we talk a lot about in Indigenous spaces about like closed practices and open practices, you know, things that should and are accessible to everybody, and things that, you know, are meant to just be for us, you know. And so, yeah, with Love is the First Sacred Lesson, I think everybody can watch it and take away something from it, but there's definitely things in it that, you know, aren't for everybody. Like I recognize that the film is about a specific, you know, community, and about me, and about like my experience, but also, you know, about what it is to be queer in Mi'kmaq, you know, and so yeah, there's things about it that people might like not get, and I've definitely had like non-Indigenous friends like ask me lots of questions about it, and I'm happy to have those conversations to a certain extent. But yeah, like I think that also as like people who aren't like coming from a like straight white male perspective, I think that it's like actually really nice to be able to make films that are for people like us.
Specific to people, specific to land as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you. Paper Accordion is a beautiful art piece. It's a beautiful film. I do think it is political, but maybe not overtly political, and maybe not intentionally political. Sometimes the work that we make, ideas kind of seep in anyway. But
I agree with that.
everybody should check it out.
And same with yours, Lola's First Sacred Lesson, as well as the other films of the series.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that everyone did such an amazing job. I'm so proud of everybody's work.
Joanne, Marusha,
Yeah.
Jackie, and Tristan.
Yes, yeah. And all the films ended up really different too.
Yeah.
So people should check them out. This is Otherly, I think, on Instagram.
But it was great talking to you.
It's great talking to you too. We're so bad at like the official pitch stuff.
Yeah.
We're like, and this is Otherly on Instagram. No, but it's a pleasure as always. I'm so glad that you could be here in Montreal.
Yeah, this is a great conversation.
Absolutely.
It's always nice talking to you.
Same.